Welcome to B-Flow Sessions, the podcast where we help you find your flow on the water and in life. I'm your host, Brad Burden. Join me for conversations with the athletes, adventurers, and paddlers who are all seeking the flow. B-Flow Sessions is proudly sponsored by Pucon Kayak Retreat. Experience world-class whitewater, expert instruction, and the adventure of a lifetime in Pucon, Chile. Save 10% on your trip with the promo code BFLOW10. We are also proudly sponsored by Dagger Kayaks. Team-tested, paddler-proven designs for every river and every paddler. And thanks to our partners, Sawyer Paddles, Stohlquist, and Level 6 for keeping us in the flow. Welcome to the next episode of B-Flow Sessions, and in this session I am joined by one of the best expedition kayakers in the world, somebody that I'm sure most people listening to are very familiar with, a guy who goes big and really tries to push himself in adventure and getting himself uncomfortable out there in the elements. Ben Stookesberry. Ben, welcome to B-Flow Sessions.
Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so like I said, Ben's been one of the premier kayakers and premier athletes in our sport for a very long time, but really kind of focused in on those extreme expeditions, going out into the middle of nowhere, finding the deepest canyons, the hardest whitewater, not just the hardest whitewater, but the hardest trips logistically and everything. I've seen some of his videos, and it's like he wants to make sure that the whitewater's hard, the portages are hard, everything about it is difficult. That's where Ben finds his happy place. So we're going to hear a lot about those adventures. But somebody with, well over 100 first ascents, and again, just always out there charging hard. But again, welcome to B-Flow Sessions.
Yeah, right on. Let's chat.
So how did you find your flow in kayaking?
Yeah, 1998, Moab, Utah. I got invited out there by my freshman college roommate, Eric Seymour, to be a raft guide. So I took my woofer, did my raft guide training with blazing paddles that later became a part of oars. And Eric Seymour had already learned how to kayak, and he took me out to the local lake there in Moab, up right below the La Salle Mountains. And in that cold, clear water, he was able to get me rolling in about 45 minutes. And I guess that was one of the first things that gave me an idea that I had some kind of aptitude at it. And, immediately went out and ran the big class 3 on the daily section. I believe it's called Whites. And, took a good solid swim, and it's been an up and down process since there of, small victories and, setbacks. And yeah, it's been a good ride. But yeah, it was Moab, Utah.
So, that was 98, by, what year did you burst through and kind of getting figured out like, hey, I'm pretty good at this sport. And then not only that, but then finding that kind of niche that you honed in on of the extreme and the expeditions. When did that come about, and how did that all occur?
Yeah, I guess one big thing that happened was at the end of that summer. By the end of the summer, I had just spent a lot more time in Eric Seymour's kayak than he had. He was out on the multi-days, and I was just doing the daily stretches. So every day after work, when it was about 100 to 110 out, I was in that Pink Diablo kayak practicing. End of the summer, I got myself a used Preon Fly, and so I was already doing the squirts, doing a lot of rolling, and just felt at my best and really motivated by this brand new sport that maybe I had seen once on National Geographic as a kid. And I had gone back, when I went back to Western State, immediately I hopped on a mountain bike. It was an old mountain bike from back home in Greeley, Colorado that I had got when I was like 15 years old, and probably had never changed the tires since then. There's bald tires. I was lucky I was wearing a helmet, because we got to the top of Hartman's Rocks right outside Gunnison at Western State, where I was going at the time, pointed it downhill and immediately lost control, started going way too fast, lost it over the handlebars, and just crashed harder than I'd ever crashed before. snapped my femur, and
Oh,
yeah, it was a full life altering experience because I had only applied to Western State as this place that I had known from a family trip. My dad had taken us to Crested Butte when I was 12, when I
mm,
was actually when I was 6 years old, and then again when I was 12 years old. And from those two experiences, I knew that I just wanted to get out of the plains of Colorado and get into the mountains. And that was this place that existed in my head as the perfect spot to go and and really be able to ski and study. And yeah, that was all of a sudden out the window for a full year of recovery after they put this titanium rod into my leg. But a month later, I was able to get back into the kayak at a pool session at Western State, roll the kayak, and then a couple weeks later, Eric and I went out to do a Westwater trip, and that was my very first Westwater, probably my first Class 4. And
mm.
yeah, I was able to get in the kayak, run through that beautiful canyon in the beginning of November. I remember ice along the banks, and then crutch out of the kayak, and it was just like, man, this is all of a sudden that became my primary focus in life. It had gone and replaced this passion that I had had since I was a young boy when my dad introduced skiing to me as his main outdoor passion, and it really just went from there. Both Eric and I transferred schools, found a in-state academic exchange that took us up to Southern Oregon, where I had some family. I had an uncle that was a
Mm.
professor at Southern Oregon University, and at that point, Eric and I were both kayaking year-round on the Rogue River. And pretty darn soon, like even that first spring, after I had learned how to kayak in Moab and had done that trip at Westwater, we found some floodwater on the Poudre River right outside Fort Collins. We
Mm.
both ran our first Class 5. The friend that we were with smashed his hand into some rocks right at the top of the Poudre Narrows. Eric and I made it through unscathed. So I think that was another sort of key experience, was getting lucky, getting through that first Class 5, maybe not having the near drowning experience right off the bat. And yeah, we were just totally focused on that, transferred to Southern Oregon College. And then once we were boating year round on the Rogue River, on the Deschutes, expanding our horizons into some of the most amazing rivers on earth in Northern California, it wasn't
Sure.
too long before we took that basic level of proficiency in Class 5 and just started pushing it. And it was right at that time when the mini DV handy cams became cheap, prevalent, and the software to edit those videos was super cheap and available, especially through our multimedia program, where we made a good friend, Brent Button. And 2000, I believe it was two, the end of 2000, 2001, we were filming quite a bit. And then by the spring of 2002, right as I was graduating from Southern Oregon University, we came out with our very first whitewater kayaking film called No Big Names. And that was really the launch. It was like it put us on the map because there was some legendary first descents that went down in that particular film. First descent, right side of Mesa. First descent, Wabena Falls and the Royal Gorge. Some first descents from New Zealand that one of our other partners was able to accomplish, Chris Mangus. Eric and another partner, Chris Larson, had gone down to Chile and had done some exploration, some second descents there. And so we had this film that had this full international appeal, that was maybe not the best shot film in the world, but was pretty well edited by Brent Button, the guy that was studying to be a multimedia major and had access to those first editions of Final Cut through the lab there at Southern
Mm.
Oregon University. And the very
Yeah.
first show was, in our hometown at that time of Ashland, Oregon. 250 people filled the Creek Bar and Grill, and we were off to the races.
Does it
We
ever
had
hit you like how funny it is that your first like big kayaking video was no big names, and because of that, you became a big name in the industry?
Yeah, certainly there's some irony there for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's certainly, I think that it's very much been foundational to the way that I've tried to approach any sort of notoriety and
Sure.
or the way that I want to present myself and these expeditions, which has always been, no big names, all big rivers, or just all about the rivers. And really, when I came into the sport, it was at a time when the big names were so dominant. You're talking about the
Right.
Theo Berman era, um,
Yeah.
all those historic wave sport paddlers, and
Yeah. It
some of
was the
those
height of the
guys,
freestyle tour.
the height of the freestyle tour, arguably the most popular our sport has ever been in the early
Sure.
2000s period. You had guys driving around in
Yep.
Chevy Avalanches, the Subarus, like that whole thing. And so, yeah, I think that was really, that had to have been the inception of our sport really getting fueled by seeing what others were doing and then wanting to push the
Hmm.
sport potentially in a new way, where as opposed to it's like, it's this guy doing these moves. We wanted to push it as like this group, this team of paddlers doing these rivers together. And it's not always good lines. In fact, that was kind of the nickname, the backhanded nickname that came out was, we came out with 3 or 4 episodes of this, or editions of this No Big Names, and it was pretty widely said behind our backs, no good lines. But
And
we persevered, and we enjoyed that. We embraced it.
sure. But the sport was evolving right then too, even though it was at its peak, maybe from popularity, boat sales, sponsorships. But that whole freestyle tour thing and boats coming out every year, like we didn't know it, but that was at the end. And you were on the West Coast, kind of doing the no big names, and almost the same version of that on the East Coast was like LVM, kind of with a similar mindset, right? And they even had like a video, video killed the rodeo star, and I don't know that it did necessarily. That's what killed it, but certainly the freestyle tour kind of died off, and what came next was the stuff like what you were starting, and that's what's been the driving force as far as media and sponsorships now for the last 20 years in the sport.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, LVM was another groundbreaker, and they were even, a few years before us. There was
Sure.
there were several crews. If you were to talk about the West Coast, yeah, you would talk about potentially the Ashland Mine crew, which was the No Big Names thing that I was a part of, and you would think about TGR and the Nurpu crew that
Yeah.
was out of here where I live now in Montana. And then
Right.
Rush and the Young Guns started soon thereafter, and Lindgren was already out here for more than a decade before that.
Right.
2002, it's crazy to think that 2002, when we came out with No Big Names, they were completing that first descent of the Upper Sangpo. Um,
Right.
and so it was really a time when there was a lot of inspiration to be had. And there
Hmm.
was this great equalizer of video where I can say pretty honestly that if any one of us that was a part of my particular crew were to have gone out and try to compete with these guys in a freestyle realm or even in a race style setting, we probably wouldn't even get very far. We might get out of the regional circuit, but we certainly wouldn't get onto a national level. And so what we brought to the table, I think, was a different idea of following in the footsteps of a similar idea of following in the footsteps to a Scott Lindgren or a Walt Blackabar
Sure.
before him,
Right.
and really honing in on and trying to develop a way to tell these stories beyond just like a music driven soundtrack, and to include
Right.
all of the drama that unfolds, not only the stuff that's happening on the river, but later, certainly, like what's happening off the river, the politics that surround the place became a huge element of the stories that we were
Mm.
trying to tell, and that I am still trying to tell to this day.
I want to get into some of these big stories and adventures that you've been on, and some that have been documented and some that haven't, maybe. But to put a bow on kind of that era and kind of the different genres, maybe, of kayaking. Um, you grew up skiing. I'm from the East Coast, so like I've been snowboarding a handful of times, but obviously aware of other sports. You made the comment like maybe my crew couldn't finish very high in a rodeo, make the freestyle team, or do a competitive race, do slalom, whatever. You don't see that mentality though in other sports. Like somebody who gets helicoptered into backcountry skiing is not worried that they can't compete in a half pipe with the best half pipers, and the best half pipers probably aren't worried about trying to get helicoptered into backcountry because they have to train to compete. I think it's both a good thing and a bad thing that kayakers, we kind of dabble a little bit in all aspects of that. I was mostly a freestyle guy, but I dabbled a little bit in slalom. I've done some extreme, nothing like what you've done. I've watched some of your videos and I'm like, that doesn't look pleasant to me at all. But that's what really, challenges and motivates you. I guess what I'm saying is like in kayaking, we tend to cross pollinate with each other more maybe than other extreme sports. And I think that's a good thing, but it might lead us to compare ourselves sometimes too. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's a point to be made there that you might be getting to, which is it's like necessary to have a freestyle background before 2000, before the early 2000s, and into that area of really hard freestyle, and when the boats made that leap in development.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very common for the river runners and for this burgeoning freestyle community to be somewhat separate. And you would definitely see some very accomplished exploratory kayakers, river runners that, especially some of the guys, the older paddlers that you hear about from the early days on the North Fork of the Payette River, they'd be going down that river damn near with no roll. And
Right.
it's certainly become like that's an absolute necessary quintessential discipline to train in for almost all aspects, especially of class 5 kayaking, to have the background of freestyle kayaking. And it's something that very much benefited my kayaking, especially from my days on the Rogue River, really close to the Nugget hole. When I say I couldn't necessarily compete with the top guys, I know that for a fact because all of those top guys, Taylor Robertson, Teo Berman, Jay Kincaid, Macy
Right.
Burnham,
Yeah. Yeah.
Brian, not Fletcher, Brian, gosh, the guy who's still to this day, he's our age,
Brian Kirk.
Brian Kirk.
Yeah.
The guys that, competed on the international level and probably went to that famous Full James rodeo in New Zealand, the world championship of freestyle kayaking. All of those guys would come and compete at the Nugget rodeo. So I was able to I would be there, I'd be training, I'd compete in the rodeo against them. And then I think it was either 2000 or 2001. None of those guys showed up. 16 or 17, it must have been like a 16-year-old Rush Sturgis show up. And I was able to win that rodeo with a barrage of right-hand ends that never stopped. I think maybe there was a couple switch wheels involved, but this was in a time when you were already doing the tricky woos and whatnot. But yeah, I knew I didn't have the aptitude and the talent of the really high-end freestyle guys, but absolutely, positively, it was foundational to be able to survive out there on the expeditions when things didn't go perfectly to plan, which, is very often the case in exploratory kayaking. The plan B is certainly more important than the plan A many times.
Well, let's jump into some of those big first expeditions that you went on. What was like the first big multi-day? Obviously you've got those high Sierra runs in California, but maybe even something, as far as like gradient, it's hard to get much steeper than that. But as far as like how committed, big time backcountry, one of those first big expeditions that you kind of planned, organized, and led. Tell us about that.
Well, Yeah, I don't. I shouldn't take. Um, I shouldn't take responsibility. Or I shouldn't take the credit for any total expedition, but and it's always been a collaboration. The very first one was a
Sure.
collaboration with Eric Seymour, Brandon Buell, Joey Ellis, and we went on a driving trip down to Mexico, and we started out on the Alsec River, and eventually we made our way to Oaxaca on the first descent of, I believe it was called the Copalita, if I'm not mistaken. That was the very first multi-day first descent on the
Mm,
Copalita, and then later on, roundabout New Year's 2002 to 2003, we went after the first descent of the Santo Domingo, a Santo
mm,
Domingo river that Cully Erdman and I believe Doug Ammons was on that trip, and others had essentially walked through a decade or so earlier, if not more. And yeah, Eric and I were there at that point alone trying to take down the first descent of this, what would be one of the highlights of my kayaking career still to this day, on the Santo Domingo right after New Year with way too much water. There was probably 7,000 CFS at the put in, 14,000 CFS below where the Pajom comes out of Guatemala, and still we made our way down the river, hiked out, hiked back in. We spent over a week camped under a remote bridge, in that politically charged environment of Chiapas at that
mm.
time.
Right. Yeah.
After having been chased down by a group of Zapatistas on the Hatate earlier, like that's that's when I really discovered um, a penchant or um, appreciation for being in these places that had a much bigger story than just like a steep river, but
Hmm.
also had this whole history and a indigenous people and an uprising and a couple of gringos from a couple of gringos that had just graduated college, not knowing what the hell they were doing, what the hell they were getting into, what the hell they were running from, and learning that story that would unfold over the next decade. So really, it was that Santo Domingo River that didn't come to fruition until 2005, until February of 2006, on a subsequent expedition with a paddler named Jesse Coombs, who I collaborated with to come up with a subsequent video series called the Hotel Charlie series that came out in 5 installments and basically launched our partnership with Eddie Bauer.
Oh wow.
So that's the one that I can really point to, and then one more that I would point out that took place just before we actually were able to complete a first river level descent of the Santo Domingo was the Tunuyan with Silvio Gurrieri and Pato Valsecchi. I had been in Argentina filming for Twitch 5. I
Mm.
had the no big name had gone to collaborate with the biggest name in kayaking at that time, and
Yeah.
in Teo Berman, and yeah, it was a bit of a contentious relationship ultimately.
Okay.
After Yeah, there's a whole set of stories. I mean, today Teo and I are on perfectly good terms, and in fact, he Owen Doyle was just doing some work for him recently, and he let Owen Doyle get off. Owen Doyle's a subcontractor for some of his real estate projects there, and he let Owen Doyle get off specifically so he could go take me on this hair-raising high water descent of the Clark Fork of the Box Canyon. So I feel like we've come full circle at this point. But yeah, and that was also a very foundational experience. Was kayaking with Teo, kayaking with another longtime friend, basically a family friend at this point, Josh Bechtel, Eric Seymour as well. I was in Argentina, and the first thing that another foundational character in my kayaking story, Devin Knight, whose family gave Eric and I a job on bridge construction, basically for the first decade of my kayaking career, to do this like temporary prevailing wage work in California to fund the kayaking experience. Like, we weren't
Mm.
well funded kayakers for the first decade, and we'd swing the hammer and make these crazy prevailing wage California wages, and all because of Devin Knight's family. Devin and I, who's also in the Twitch 5 series, had gone to Argentina first to scout, and the very first river we tried to get into, just the two of us, we were like showed up right south of Mendoza, trying to get up to the Tunuyan River. Where our plan was we were going to drive a minivan in spring over a 14,000 foot pass. So we were absolutely out to lunch. I ended up staying for another, let's see, I think the filming ended up taking us about 2 to 3 months in Argentina. And then I stayed for another 6 months in total until Semana Santa, when I joined with 2 Argentinian kayakers, again, Silvio Gurdietti and Pato Valsecchi. Diego Valsecchi's brother, who's was a legendary kayaker and partner of Alex Nix, and pulled off the first ascent of a 7-day trip into the highest portion of one of the last high portion of the Argentinian Andes. So Silvio organized horseback over this 14,000 foot pass into the headwaters of the Tunuyan, and we were the first to complete the full descent of the Tunuyan River in 2005. So then it was after that, it was joining up with Jesse Coombs for another attempt on the Rio Buey in Colombia, and we pulled off some 21st ascents, 15 or 21st ascents with Ryan McPherson in Brazil, and then we pulled off the first ascent of the Santo Domingo. So that was really a turning point when I went from pulling off some first ascents here and there, whether it was, the Right Side Mesa, Wabena Falls, others in Oregon, California, a few internationally in Mexico, to really starting to focus more on these expeditions.
Right. What goes into planning an expedition of that magnitude?
Yeah, well, I think that, the Tunuyan was especially noteworthy because it was me following Silvio Gurietti's lead and seeing how he was planning that expedition and how we executed it as such a tight team, as opposed to coming in as individuals that had our own food and whatnot. We accomplished that first ascent with me being the outsider that was along for the ride with these Argentinians that showed me the best possible way to pull off these trips is a full collaborative effort, pooling all the resources. I think that trip cost us $110 a piece for the horses, for the food, for the ride to the put-in, for the pickup from the takeout. And it was all, it was because on one side, the economy in Argentina had been so devalued. And on the other side, this insane collaborative kind of guru-like experience that I had with Silvio Gurdietti, and showed me, every little item that comes out of your throw bag is kind of divided and dispersed in the group. And so that's a little bit different than some of us do it in the States. I definitely see it with some of the younger crews that they're much more collaborative. The TP boys are a good example of that. They're very collaborative and they do things differently. But you also see groups where everybody pulls out their individual freeze-dried meal. Everybody eats alone, and then maybe there's a little sharing. But this is like the Argentinian way to do it was the opposite of that. And so that was sort of the benchmark that I saw.
That kind of fits with just kind of culture anyway, though, doesn't it?
I think so. Theirs is very much a familiar culture, in those places in Latin America and other parts of the world. Like, there's no old folks home.
Right.
The kids certainly don't leave the family house until maybe they get married. But even then, maybe their wife just comes and lives at that same place. So absolutely, you're right. And so I think that getting back to your question of, what is it like and what is the focus of the expedition? I think it's very much like when you see a Hollywood movie or you see a really well done kayaking film, you'll notice in the credits that there's just this whole list of team. And
Right.
it's not just the people that you see in the movie. Their part might be smaller than, say, for example, someone like a Pete Meredith from the Congo expedition, Hendry's best friend, that was, arguably the most important piece of that whole Congo expedition that Steve Fisher and Tyler and Rush all pulled off, was because of their fixer on the ground. I could certainly say that about Silvio Guardietti, although he was a paddler on our trip on the Tunuyen, like following in his footsteps and seeing how he did those things very much informed me of the way to do it. But then, for example, like we followed Hendry into Central Africa on the big expedition, into 6th or 7th descent of the Murchison Falls, the first descent of the Ruzizi, the head stream that goes into Tanganyika and out into Kalemi. And I could say the same about Mauricio Arredondo in Colombia, our fixer, the person that originally invited Shannon Linane and I to go to Colombia back in 2003, when there were just absolutely no other foreigners in the country. Certainly no other foreign. Well, there was a couple foreigners in the country, but nothing like it is today. He was the person who invited us. He was the person who sort of was able to navigate us through this political and conflict-rich environment that existed in Colombia at that time. And I could say the same about Diego Robles more recently in Ecuador, being that person. So the collaboration with the locals that live there and trying to really, and really that being sort of the regret that I had from the Chalupas expedition that basically ended with evacuation and started with a team of foreigners, although we very much would have never gotten to that point without the help of Booth Sessions, Abe Herrera. Like, he was our fixer, but the regret of not having a local on the trip when there were so many competent, expert level kayakers in the Ecuadorian paddling community, and then that being the motivation to going back and finishing the Chalupas with Diego Robles, going back to Ecuador pretty much every year since then to collaborate with the Ecuadorian paddlers. So I think that would be my number one tip is to make that connection, whether it's with a California paddler in California, a Canadian paddler, a local Canadian paddler in the zone that you're going to look for rivers there, a local Mexican paddler fixer in the zone where you're going there. Like, you gain so much knowledge by partnering with someone who lives there and who knows the ground, and who knows the territory, knows where to, source all of your equipment. I think that's really the key.
Talk to us about the big expedition, and I know I've watched it fairly recently on, I think it's Red Bull TV. It's still on there, but the big expedition, was it Papua New Guinea? Is that where it was?
Yeah, circa 2015, Papua New Guinea, the country, and the island of New Guinea, of course, is separated. Half of it is Indonesia. The other half is New Guinea, and then Papua New Guinea also includes these island arcs. And one of the biggest islands that's not associated with the main island of New Guinea is called New Britain. And we had seen an expedition from Trip Jennings and a National Geographic trip where they had gone and found a river that went through a cave. And so at that time, Chris Korbulik and I, who became my longtime expedition kayaking partner, along with Pedro Oliva from Brazil. The three of us were making a show, and we were 3 or 4 years into a show called Kayak in Brazil, which Pedro had leveraged from his world record descent a month before Tyler made that still the highest waterfall descent at Palouse Falls. Pedro had set the record at Salto Bello of 130 feet and used that to get onto national TV. But instead of just making himself this larger than life personality, he brought us on board to create this expedition, extreme whitewater kayaking series. And so when New Guinea came on our radar and New Britain came on our radar from Trip Jennings and his group's descent of a river there, we put that on our agenda as a place that we could go film a whole season of kayak. And so we ended up going over there. I think it ended up being half a season. Half the season was in Australia, and then we made the jump across from Cairns to Papua New Guinea and then over to New Britain, and we ended up pulling off the first descent of the ISO River. And this river was only possible by a helicopter drop into the headwaters and then an aerial pickup from the takeout. And we ended up taking a chopper from the takeout back towards the airport. And when we flew out of the takeout for the ISO, we flew over this insane thing that looked like the Grand Canyon, layers of red rock, stair-stepping down into this beautiful gorge that had a turquoise blue river at the bottom. And that was the Berryman River. And it was the first time that we had seen that. So we put it on the list as something that was one of the most spectacular things that we'd ever seen. And we ended up organizing a Red Bull expedition with Brian Smith and Real Water Productions to collaborate with Red Bull and film this first descent of the Berryman River that turned into a monster expedition, and something that, like, we had gone into the thing thinking that it was sort of an open scenario and not realizing that at the bottom of this Grand Canyon gorge there were these slot canyons that we only saw once we came back a couple of years later. I think our first Papua New Guinea expedition was in 2013, and then when we came back in 2015, we had budget from Eddie Bauer to do our scouting, and then Brian Smith and Real Water Productions had a big budget from Red Bull to film the thing, and with a helicopter, with a Cineflex. And so it was only when we got up in the air and really gave it a good helicopter scout did we realize that we were way in above our heads. And luckily their sound guy was a climber out of southern BC named Matt Mataloni. And on site, on the side of this cinder block wall, he taught us how to hook and bolt. And we had brought a rope, but we didn't have a drill, so we were able to buy an expensive, huge 24 volt or whatever, like massive 20 volt Bosch drill that we ended up putting in the kayaks. And we were able to, like, basically jerry rig bolt hangers, and over the course of 14-day self-support, we were able to pull off that first descent of the Berryman River. And yeah, it's pretty well documented in that movie, with the caveat is I always thought they should have included the story about the sound guy showing us how to pull off the actual rope work that we did, because we had to move sideways down the canyon, we had to bolt our way sideways, and then yeah, it was crazy. And it was only, I don't think it was much more than like 36 kilometers in 14 days. So you can imagine how slow. And one of the portages took us over a week. So it was,
oh my gosh,
it was an amazing collaboration of this crew that came out of southern BC that had the sound guy that was able to basically give us the key to the Berryman Gorge, the Grand Canyon of the Pacific.
I want to apologize up front for what I'm about to ask. and forgive just being naive, but I think anybody who watches really extreme whitewater on TV or on a video or on YouTube, it never does it justice as how difficult, how isolated, or how just on the edge you are, unless it's like a huge waterfall. I think those relate a lot, but then you still don't know what it's like when you're going over the lip. But when I watched that, it looked like the rapids that you were able to run weren't the most extreme things that Ben Stookesberry's ran. What was in those canyons that you were like, there's no way we could even think about going there down there. We've got a portage for 14 days to get around it.
Mostly limestone sieves. Yeah,
Okay,
that was it
just
was a
completely unnavigable.
yeah, it was just a huge sequence of limestone that had been uplifted at some point in the geologic past. So at the bottom, you had this mixture of travertine, which in some cases allowed us to run pretty spectacular whitewater, really, for locked-in expedition where we couldn't empty our boats out to run the whitewater. We're running the whitewater with 100-pound boats. We're still
100
running
exactly.
40 and 50-foot waterfalls, and then in those tightest of canyons, that travertine comes in and just welds these like gnarly, sharp limestone blocks into place. And then in some cases we just couldn't even see,
Right.
what was at the bottom. So that was a point where we identified these canyons that were most likely portages. And then even then, we really didn't know 100% if our strategy was going to work. And yeah, there was a whole incident that didn't get told in the film where we were portaging. I think it was most of gorge number 7, but the wall went blank hundreds of meters up. So we were left with no choice but to rappel into the canyon. We knew there was class 5 below. We thought, and we didn't have a drone at that time, so there was no way for us to double check what we had seen and what we had filmed and what we had captured from the helicopter, other than to go over that footage over and over again, which we had stored on our phones, and basically be forced to just drop into this canyon. And when we dropped into the canyon, it was 2 pitches down into a spot that left us still like 150 feet or another rope length above the river, where we would have to rappel in our kayaks to river level. That was all going fairly well until Pedro Oliva, the Brazilian that was with us. It was myself, Chris Korbulik, Benny Marr. That was the second big mission that we had done with Benny Marr. And then Pedro Oliva, he was the first one to go down, kind of being the lightest, was our thought process. And we just left too much tail of the rope at the bottom as we were lower, as he was rappelling himself down that rope. And we were lowering him down that. Were we lowering him? At some point, the line got twisted, and luckily he was only about 10 feet of the water.
Oh,
But all of a sudden, the rope just shot back up towards us. We couldn't see him, so we had no idea what had happened. There's a huge smack in the bottom. Benny was a hero and just jumped on the rope immediately. We shortened up the line, got him down into the water, and luckily we got the call back up, or the shout that he was okay. Got Chris down there, and by the time I was ready to rappel myself and my kayak down, it was just no light left. How quickly it's said, you've probably experienced down in the tropics, how quickly it goes from, afternoon. There's almost no dusk
sure.
whatsoever. There's no sunset. It's just quick. And it was
Well, and
dark.
being in a canyon, it blocks the sun as well.
Yeah, it was dark, and it was darker because there was a huge storm right on top of me that was just about to dump rain. And so I tied myself to the canyon wall as that ravine that I was in turned into a waterfall. And yeah, I thought I wasn't going to make it, and just stuck there, yeah. And luckily, it stopped raining, the waterfall diminished, and it was pitch dark, and yeah, bivvied there for the night. And yeah, in the morning, put myself on the rope, got myself down into the canyon, ran 3 or 4 more class 5 rapids out to where the boys were were camped on a ledge, and I think it was only 2 or 3 more days until because it took us, gosh, I want to say it was like maybe 12 kilometers, or no more than 15 kilometers of that total run that took us 12 days. And then we ran, maybe the total was 45, and we ran 15 kilometers. And then the final day, we just immediately boated out like 30 kilometers of class 4, 3, 2 into the flats, past the villages. That was a big lesson that we had learned on the first trip. We had some confrontations with the villages where we had just showed up out of nowhere. And in one case, it was actually the same village that Trip Jennings and his crew had showed up in, and there had been some misunderstanding. They had thought that Trip and his crew and Andy Mazer was supposed to leave money. They had supposedly, according to them, not left any money, and we were stuck there for 3 or 4 or 5 days just negotiating with these locals to try to get out of there on good terms. And so this time around, we knew that we had to have our fixer in New Guinea. We had to alert all the communities on our way down the river that we were coming, that we were in the area. And then in that case, we budgeted in school donations and donations to the communities to make sure that they knew that we appreciated their presence and that we were there. So that in that case, it went really well. Our relations with the locals were spot on, and the thing went off without a hitch, specifically because of our liaison, that I should look up his name right now, give him credit, but anyways, that again, it's just going back to having the local fixer, having the connection to the local community to make sure that, and we learned in subsequent years, like that first trip to Chiapas, we were running away from the Zapatistas, and in subsequent trips, we'd go to the headquarters of the Zapatistas and ask for permission. And pretty much in most cases, we were able to work it out and, not have it be, some kind of conflict, but more of a collaboration, and to let them know that we're very much in line with them, protecting their natural resources, protecting their rivers, protecting their communities. And I think that, we have that in common, and that can very much be the key to us getting access to some of these places where they wouldn't want foreigners to go.
Let's eddy out and take a quick break. Do you need a break from the cold of a North American winter? Then let's head south to the best whitewater on earth at Pucon Kayak Retreat. Email me at bflowkayak@gmail.com to learn more about how you can take the ultimate paddling adventure in the heart of Chile. Now let's peel out and head downstream. Ben, your stories have been so incredible, because normally I ask these questions to kind of like, I told you before we started recording, I've got this thematic flow to the show. But your stories like encapsulated everything that I would ask. I mean, it encapsulated a good day, not so great days that ended up turning out well, and lots of advice. So that was just amazing. Just as you took us through all those epic tales of adventures, it kind of encapsulated all the questions I would normally ask. I do want to ask the Pucon Kayak Retreat Pro Flow hot tip. You mentioned carrying like 100-pound boats into these expeditions. And you've given lots of great advice for people planning expeditions with collaboration and getting people on the ground. But now let's look at like the micro. You're getting ready, you're packing your gear, you're packing your boat. Let's say we're talking like, I consider anything like greater than 3-4 days to be true multi-day. So somebody's packing for that 4 or 5 day expedition, not like a Grand Canyon where you've got commercial support, but a true backcountry expedition. What's the Ben Stookesberry Pucon Kayak Retreat Pro Flow hot tip, the things you absolutely have to have in your boat, and how do you pack it, and how do you paddle it?
Yeah, great question. So my go-to for overnight kayaking is a food afloat, and that keeps my sleeping bag, which is the thing that keeps me warm out there, dry. And so I know I've got 2 bags in my system. One is my Akoi lap bag, that's so ubiquitous in our kayaking community today, and the other is the Fuda float that goes on one side. And then my other bags, I just use pretty standard NRS style roll top bags, or like a Sea to Summit bag, and I'll use those for the stuff that goes in the back of my boat, and then the stuff that goes up in front of my bulkhead. And that, that's where I give a plug for Jackson Kayaks, because the accessibility of the bulkhead and the ease of packing is one of the things that's encouraged me and motivated me to maintain this partnership for now 2 decades, since 2006 with
Wow.
Jackson. The ability to change out any of the rope system on the fly, no ratchets, no mechanical stuff, just a very, very simple, effective, ultimately adjustable outfitting, and then just the best, easiest kayak that allows you to access the majority of the kayak's unused volume to pack, to the point where this past big mission that we did in Ecuador down the Mulatos, we launched that mission with 3 weeks worth of provisions. And we actually, because we finished that expedition with unimaginably perfect California style weather in just 12 days, for the final canyon, we actually hiked over the mountain and de-rigged ourselves a week of supplies, extra batteries, that sort of thing, in order to lighten ourselves for the box canyon that we knew was coming at the end of that river. So yeah, I think that was just, again, a testament to the Jackson kayak. And we also had a Wyatt, I should say, was in a Waka. So it's definitely doable, certainly with the other brands. And I should say, on a personal level, that I'm very grateful to the other brands for also pushing designs forward.
Sure.
And, and as I am a self-admitted Jackson Kool-Aid drinker, I'm also a person that's just very, I'm an admirer of all of these brands that keep our sport vibrant and at a cutting edge. Just when I thought years ago that they couldn't do much to the whitewater kayaking design, now we have this progressive rocker that I think is fairly attributed to the Waka brand, and has been adopted by the other brands, including Jackson, to really push our sport to the point where it's made a huge difference in river running, and our ability to stay on top of the water, and the ease at which we're able to make these lines. It's crazy, just this nuance in rocker design, what this nuance in rocker design has done for us. So
what about down? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so you've got the stuff that you need dry in your watersheds, and then from there it's really a river by river sort of determination. Do I need the climbing rope? Do I need just something like a simple pin kit? What am I gonna take in my first aid kit, which varies by destination? I'm not gonna need to have malaria medication or parasite treatment with me, probably in the rivers in the northern hemisphere, where I'm not gonna need to have think about treatment for hypothermia.
Sure.
In the rivers in the tropics. But yeah, I think in general, we can think about it in terms of sleeping. We can think about it in terms of first aid. We can think about it in terms of rescue. It's always interesting and a bit of a last minute decision, it seems, in terms of like how many breakdown paddles are we going to bring.
Right.
Especially when you're in a group of 2, it's like you play this game of 50-50 roulette. If you only bring one breakdown paddle, it's like, well,
right.
If we get lucky, it'll be perfect. If we get unlucky on the other side, if we, heads, we're perfect. Tails, we're totally screwed. So,
do you ever take hand paddles for space?
I have never taken hand paddles. Yeah. And I think in certain situations, like that's a fully viable option. And in others, hand paddling, I certainly wouldn't feel comfortable in some of these rivers for sure, where
Right.
you're making life or death ferries. No way.
Right.
But again, I'm not as as seasoned of a hand paddler as some of these folks out there. That's for sure.
Yeah, that may be more of a southeast thing with low flow. That would be hard on high volume, like you said. Some of the things that you got to just make it across from one side of the river to the next. I was just thinking out loud there. What's downstream for Ben Stookesberry? What's a big project? You maybe can't tell us. Maybe some of it's top secret, but like, what's the next thing on the horizon?
Maybe this is my ego finally coming out, but I've always thought that I wasn't a huge into like keeping secrets and making sure nobody else would find out about my first ascent, because I figured that if someone else could do it, they should go do it. And
Exactly.
there's just too many rivers out there for us to go and explore, and ultimately I think it's important for us to go out and find these rivers and put them on the map as something beautiful, or as something important to our sport, or as something
Right.
important to the communities that live downstream.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of my exploration since just after COVID, when we launched the Chalupas expedition, I've had two destinations that have really taken all of my international travel time. The first being Ecuador, of course, and my collaborations with Diego Robles, and our subsequent collaboration with another young American paddler, Willie Hankel, and Wyatt Doyle, in going back into the Yangonatis. And ultimately, our goal is to go back to the Chalupas and make a full descent, a real, true self-support descent of the Chalupas. The last descent was made via, certainly the first 7,000 feet and 20 miles of the river was made with full helicopter support. And ultimately, yeah, with the with the machete injuries and whatnot, um, I've had the goal to go back and do a proper self-support descent. And I think with our experience on the sister river, the Mulattos, last year, we finally have the team and the strategy to be able to pull that off. And yeah, it's going to be a fairly legendary descent. I think it'll take, again, at least 3 weeks to pull that off properly, self-support. And so that's the big one. And I've also been going to Chihuahua, northern Mexico, most years, following in the footsteps of Rocky Contos, who
Mm.
I boated with back in 2010. He invited me on a first descent of the Rio Piaxla that he said was the deepest canyon in North America. That experience stuck with me, and so once he finally sent me a copy of his guidebook to the rios of northern Mexico, which focuses principally on the rios of the Sierra Madre in Chihuahua, I've been enthralled with that. My first trip was with Eric Boomer, that makes for a pretty good watch, and was a collaboration with the U.S. National Whitewater Center out of Charlotte there,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
called the video called I Chihuahua. And
Okay.
my second trip was back with Willie Hankel, and we pulled off a few more of the first descents that Rocky had laid out for us in his legendary guidebook. And then, yeah, I guess it was just my third trip last year with Luke Andreka out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. We pulled off another first descent, and there's a feature article coming out in Kayak Session about the first descent of the Rio Verde. And so, yeah, my big plan coming up is to finish this very last week of first descent kayak camps, and then head immediately south to El Paso, Chihuahua City, and into Cuauhtemoc, where Bobby, our fixer, is hopefully ready to help us out. And the big dream is to pull off the first descent of the Orteguaza right outside of Creel. Excuse me, not the Orteguaza. That was another first descent in Colombia. This one's called the Oteros. It flows
Okay.
into a river called the Chiniapas. So yeah, I've been focusing on those two destinations as places that yeah, where I've developed these collaborations with the local folks. And yeah, so I've got a couple of big ones on the still left on the table, still left for this year for 2026. And incidentally,
Amazing.
this is the first year that I still haven't been a part of a first descent. The first descent of the Mulattos ended just before the new year of 2025. So we'll see. We'll see if my
If you could
I guess
squeeze one in.
it would be yeah, 26 straight years of first descents of
Wow.
at least a at least a few, if not way more first descents per year. So we'll see if I can squeeze one in. Yeah, either in Oteros or I guess we would call it the first self-support descent of the Chalupas.
Okay. Well, good luck with that. I hope you get onto it before the calendar flips. Let's now shift gears into running some rapids. This is our rapid fire segment. And I'm going to throw out a topic of kayaking, and you got to give me your top like 3 to 5 favorites, or like rank, your favorites from these different categories.
Okay.
All right, well, we'll start with an easy one. Kayak designs of all time.
Geez, yeah, probably that pink Eskimo Diablo because it was the boat I learned how to roll in.
Nice.
The the baby blue Prion Fly because it was the boat that I learned how to stern squirt in, which is, I'm still enthralled with to this day, the stern squirt maneuver.
Yep.
And um, and then yeah, I was actually really a fan of the very first Jackson Kayak Rocket.
Mm.
It was a boat that I had with me on my personal first descent of Fantasy Falls, where Devin Knight uh, and I ran some ran that river at super high water, and I felt really comfortable in that boat. And then, yeah, many of the iterations of the Jackson Creek boats have just been a continued evolution to the point where I'm in this boat that I'm so happy with today. That was the winner of the North Fork Championships that Tad Dennis paddled, which is the large flow, and
Hmm.
that for me is a peak experience. Not to talk any shit, but I got into the Manu, which is a sick boat, and to see what Owen Doyle was doing in that boat was insane. But I mean, there's no substitute for me for having a bulkhead system with no metal stays on the outside, plenty of room for my size 12 feet to be comfortable. So for me, yeah, it's that flow right now is really my favorite kayak design that I've ever experienced. That large flow, large Jackson kayak flow.
Awesome. Favorite rivers of all time. Doesn't have to be the hardest, most extreme,
Oh
just
yeah,
your
oh
favorite.
yeah, oh yeah. Okay, I think I can do this. Fantasy Falls is going to be right up there. Gosh, I mean, so Fantasy Falls of the North Fork of the McCallum, the Rio Tunuyan. I didn't just do it that first time in 2005. I've been back 2 more times, and I'd love to go back in terms of scenery. It's second to none. Top five. Okay. Gosh, Santo Domingo, also a river that I went back to several times. I don't know if I have it in these old bones to huck my meat again like that. Santo Domingo, but what a beautiful river. What a cute, cool, amazing indigenous community lives along the banks of that river. So I've got three so far. Gosh, the Dude Cozy was a legendary experience with a Nepali paddler named Surgeon Tamang. I did get a pretty gnarly case of Giardia on that river,
Mm.
but I think dysentery is kind of a little bit par for the course
It just comes
in
with the territory.
certain rivers. There's a lot of communities that live on the banks of that river, and almost zero sanit uh, yeah water
Right.
sanitation. But
Yeah.
I mean, one experience with Surgeon Tamang, I couldn't get him. I was on I was on like a photo shoot, bougie photo shoot with Eddie Bauer, and I couldn't get him on the flight up to Lukla where the airport is. So he organized porters and himself to carry our kayaks up from where essentially um, Hillary and 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 Tenzing Norgay had started back in the day when they first
Wow.
climbed Everest, and it took them well over a month just to get to base camp. Surgeon organized our kayaks to come from there. He's such a beast, and that was a legendary experience. And then there's so many more, but I'll just go straight to the Notchbach River in far northeast Canada in the Torngat Mountains of Labrador with Benny Marr,
Mm.
Pedro Oliva, Chris Korbulik, and we got up there on the George River from a train that dropped us off. It was actually uh, Eric Boomer, that was with us on the George. He had an injured knee at the time, so he didn't join us for the trek over the Torngat Mountains into the headwaters of the Notchbach. But it must be the number one waterfall river, or at least one of the number one waterfall rivers on the planet that's only been run one time, and it's probably because of the pretty stout logistics that it takes to get yourself up into a place that I experienced as the absolute gnarliest mosquitoes of black flies I've ever experienced in my whole entire life. Hands
Wow.
down, second to none.
Hmm.
So that would be the top five.
Um, Countries that you've never paddled in. You mentioned some expeditions you got coming, but a lot of these were returning back to areas. 3 to 5 countries that you've never been to, but you're looking at maps, you've studied some things, you're like, oh, there's some goods there.
Oh yeah. Well, really well-known destination at this point, Madagascar. Willie Hankel and my other buddy Owen Doyle are heading there soon, and I think they kind of invited me, but I kind of have this Chihuahua addiction going on. So I mean, that just looks like maybe the best place on earth for multi-day kayaking.
Hmm.
So Madagascar. Let's see, Madagascar. Um, the Katmai in Alaska. I've definitely boated in Alaska before, but I've never boated in the Katmai. There's some crazy rivers that flow off this volcano in the Katmai.
Okay.
Um, Greenland, I want to go back to so bad. I've done 2 trips to Greenland. The I've never kayaked in Indonesia, and the other half of the second largest island on Earth, or it would be the third if you include Australia, but the island of New Guinea, that Indonesian half looks like it has some insane rivers that go from 15,000 feet all the way to sea level over the
Oh,
course
wow.
of, 90, 60 to 100 miles.
Mm.
Um, so that's, yeah, three, maybe one more. I've never boated in New Zealand. Can you believe that? Oh my God.
I That's shocking. Yeah, that's
I've
crazy
got
to
some,
me.
uh, I've got some great Kiwi buddies. One half Kiwi, half Canadian, Sandy McEwen and Barney, Jordy, the Gradient Water boys, Ari. I'd love to go paddle with those boys, but I know they're going to intentionally try to scare the shit out of me, so I'm a little hesitant. And then I'd love to do some boating in the Alps, and I know there's many countries there, and we could probably end it there. But I know that
Okay.
there's some really special rivers in the Alps that I would love to experience. Some of the rivers in some of Noria's home rivers.
Mm.
I was just in Germany on a family trip with my mom, and was in Salzburg at the base of the Alps, and just was dreaming about some of those beautiful, beautiful rivers. Germany, Sweden, Switzerland, and then yeah, the Lapland in Sweden. That looks pretty amazing. Just having experienced Norway one time. So I've probably given you too many, but I could just I think I could keep going
That's okay.
for
Now,
another
this
set for
rapid,
another day.
yeah, we can save that for Ben Stookesberry part two. Um, this one we're going to run, this rapid we're going to run blind. So this is countries that you have paddled in. And so blind ranking here, you don't know what country I'm going to say next. You've got a ranking 1 through 5. I threw out a
Yeah.
country and you got to rank it 1 through 5, one being your favorite.
Okay.
All right. Number one, we'll give you Norway,
Uh, 4.
Ecuador,
Number one.
Okay. Mexico.
Number two.
Canada.
Number three.
United States.
Number four. Number
Okay.
five, I
You already
guess. I
put
guess it would be
number
number
five,
five.
yeah.
Oh, that's not fair. You got me.
No. And at least I didn't say like, someplace like the Iowa version of a country. I'm trying to think what that would be, right?
No, no, that's okay. Yeah, Dominica. Yeah,
Um, have you ever explored any in the Caribbean?
Dominica. Yeah, Dominica. The one expedition I did with Brad Ludden, we went to Dominica. He, classic Brad Ludden style. He was collaborating with this 5-star treehouse resort, bougie situation. But yeah, we got to run some killer, beautiful rivers on this small country of Dominica, and the locals there took us into their grass huts afterwards and told there was one story they told us about this hurricane that had hit there in the late 70s. Dominica is pretty close to the equator, so it's not a common place for hurricanes to hit, but the stories of them just getting outside, grabbing onto the grass, and then for a month or months afterwards, the only thing they had to eat was breadfruit. It was made for good times, and yeah, just cool to meet the people that live there.
That is awesome that you and Brad got to do that because I got to do some filming with TGR. Met those guys when I was working on the Fuda, and so made that connection with like Ben and Nick and those guys, and then later with Brad. And
Yeah.
my mom had gone on vacation there in like the late '90s, early 2000s, and told me about this place. She's like, Brad, everywhere I turned there was waterfalls. You got to go down there and explore it. And I'd given those guys like that idea. And then
Oh,
I kind
nice.
of got out of the kayaking world, and so I'm so glad that people went there to explore that because yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, circa 2007, I believe.
Okay, yeah, that was like 2001, 2002, where I was doing some film with
Yeah.
TGR. It was like we got to go check this island out. That's
Yeah, it's
awesome.
funny because it was yeah, this kind of the same thing happened with that Notchbach. Um, Joel Kowalski had shown me satellite imagery of the Notchbach on a trip that we were doing, and yeah, I kind of stole that one from him. So I
Oh,
think
but
I
like you
think
said,
we
there's no
stole that. We stole the Dominica from you.
no, there's no stealing. I'm glad somebody got there and was able to fire it up because just hearing about it and then researching, I was like, this is amazing. But so believe me, no, I'm stoked that somebody did it. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the connection, but that's awesome.
Huh.
That's really cool. Well, Ben, this has been amazing, but we've got to give you some time here to do your final flow. The river gods come down and they say, man, you've had one of the best careers of all time. But the bad news is this is the last time you're going to put on a spray skirt. Hopefully, this doesn't happen until you're an old man. But the good news is you get to be transported back to your prime. You get to be in any boat on any river with any crew, and you only have one day, no bending the rules, and like you're going to make this a multi-day expedition. So, where would you be? What boat would you be in? And most importantly, who would be in the crew?
Oh man, that's pretty tough. Pretty tough. Um, Gosh, yeah. I mean, yeah. I guess my prime was probably around about 2010. One day down Middle Kings
Hmm.
with Chris Corbulic. So yeah, it sure would be fun. Yeah, one day Middle Kings, Chris Corbulic. Um, we had a little lower flow. I think we were just maybe 1100 CFS on that Rogers Crossing gauge. So maybe we could get a little bit more bold in our older age, or I guess we're in our prime. So
You're in your prime. Yeah, you can dial it up.
let's up the flow a little bit. Let's go 16 or 1700 Rogers Crossing, Middle Kings, one day, Chris Corbulic, uh, Willie Hankel, Owen Doyle, and Nuria I would say,
Awesome.
even though Nori and I haven't boated together in several years, that sure would be so cool. And yeah, I'll take the large flow if I
Awesome.
got all the elements there.
Very cool. Well, this has been just an epic, journey into the adventures that you've been on, and thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for everything you do for the sport of bringing so much notoriety to the sport, not for your own sake, but for the sport and for the rivers and for those communities through your adventures and some of your projects. Just thank you so much.
Yeah, Brad. Thank you for the opportunity, and yeah, I feel like that was one of the better, more organized podcasts I've been a part of. So yeah,
Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
I
Thank you
appreciate
very much.
that opportunity.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. And until next time, hopefully one of these days when you slow down a little bit and can come down to my level, drop down to class 4 level, we can boat sometime.
I'm more of a class 4 boater than you ever know. So yeah, if you're ever in Missoula, Montana, we have one of the best class 2-3 kayak runs in the world, the Alberton Gorge. Please come do it with us. We'll be so stoked to boat with you.
I've been there and I want to do it again. So that sounds
Right on.
great.
Or Locksaw,
Thanks
even
again.
better. Come on out for Locksaw season. That's what am I
Even
saying
better.
here?
Yes. I can go run left side of Mesa too.
Sweet. Let's do it.
All right. Thanks
All
again.
right.
Thanks for joining me on another episode of B-Flow Sessions. If you enjoyed today's session, please subscribe, leave a rating and a review, and share the episode with your paddling crew. It helps the show and the paddling community grow. Don't forget to check out our sponsor, Pucon Kayak Retreat, and save 10% on your trip to Chile with promo code BFLOW10. And thanks again to Dagger Kayaks, plus our partners Sawyer Paddles, Stohlquist, and Level 6 for making this podcast possible. You can also follow B-Flow Sessions on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook for instructional videos, behind-the-scenes content, and more conversations from the whitewater world. Until next time, keep paddling and finding your flow.